Catherine, the human race seems to be in a very weird place. If you read the newspaper about it, or
Yeah, I'm very concerned about India.
about what?
India.
Yes, so let's say if you look at almost any place, if you look at the apartment building in your neighborhood after seeing the apartment building that fell down in Florida, now they're suspect.
But they should be. They should be.
Whether the make-a-buck tendency is so strong that it overlooks what it knows is okay. It says puts it off another year or this, but within the business structure, the profit margin means that you minimize what probably should be addressed.
If Charles Dickens was living, he'd be writing novels about it.
Yeah. So let's say just walking down the street with your hands in your pockets and observing, looking to the right, looking to the left, just going about your affairs. Yet you see this hidden thing that everyone knows about running through the story. And there's agreements and disagreements running through the story around an invisibility, you know. And so let's say we navigate through this year, and we've normalized it in the last year and a half. But something, somehow, time seems to have shifted, somehow. Structure seems to have shifted. It does seem to have been one long weekend or something like that. That Netflix may have saved our lives in some way with increasing.
Annie, have you seen Manifest on Netflix?
I don't know. I've seen it advertised. I don't know if I've seen it.
It's addictive, but I think it's hit the zeitgeist of the times.
What I did see, again, because we had seen it before, was about this fellow whose wife died. That he became very cynical to everyone in the department that he worked in the newspaper or whatever. And so he was putting everyone down and revealing everyone. What was the name of that, Mary? But it was brilliant.
Life after, or
Life after. Life after a loved one dies. And then you have these experiences where people try to soothe you and you put them down and it's Ricky Gervais.
the guy from The Office.
The fellow from The Office is the lead in it,
Yeah.
but it's brilliant. His put downs are brilliant. And then the comebacks are equally brilliant. But he has a boss that's saying, why are you doing this? We're trying to help you grieve. And this, and he says, look, you're a schmuck. You've always been a schmuck. I saw you give a raise to people that didn't deserve it. And how frightened you are as a boss and whatever. So, and how lame you are. So stop it already. Leave me be. And let me be a critic. You know. But it was very interesting. The premise was that she continued on in his memory and in his recordings. And in one of the recordings, she kind of told him before passing, now look, you better do this and snap out of it there. And she was giving him an instruction on how to cope with things. But okay, it's as dumb as that. So we'll watch yours now.
Do you want to know the premise to Manifest?
Yes, I've heard of it. So yes. So what is
Okay, the premise is this. Commercial airline with about 200 passengers is coming back from Jamaica to New York. The movie's set in New York. And it doesn't come back. So after a while, everyone's presumed dead, crashed in the ocean. 5.5 years later, the plane returns. The passengers think they've just been on the plane 5 hours. and they have not aged one day.
Oh, that's great.
And eventually they find out they have certain powers. They feel an inner calling to do things. Anyway, that's all I'll say, but it's
No,
a
that's very
mixture
good.
of sci-fi, potboiler, crime, thriller.
Also mixed time. In other words, the people who were away thought that it was still the same time that they were in.
Yes,
Yes,
exactly.
I think I've had experiences like that also.
Yes. No, it's, but I think it really hits the zeitgeist of the moment too.
Returning home thinking that there was a home waiting a year
There
later,
was a what?
thinking that there was a logical home waiting for you a year after you go to India or
Yeah.
something, and you return and you see that life moved on, or the neighborhood's changed, or there's no longer that literal reality. But somehow in your mind's eye, life stayed the same, waiting there,
Yeah.
whatever. And when you see the shift, okay, it's oh, look at that. That must be the UPS man. Thank you very much for your help.
Anyway, I'd be interested to know what you think of it if you watch it.
Okay, I'll do that. Yeah, no, I've been seeing accidentally and by chance, we've been seeing different. We watched another very weird thing yesterday. I don't know if we'll be able to do it again, and that's Killing Eve.
Yeah, I
A
didn't.
show called Killing Eve, and these two. I don't know. I still don't get it. I still don't get it, but somehow the attraction between these two women have created a series, and one is an assassin or something, and the other one works for the CIA or something like that. And but it was so dumb.
Yeah.
Yes. What to say? That must be evidence. You must be saying if watching Netflix or something like that was akin to taking opiates, you would say, "Holy, you're watching too many series if you're watching that one." Okay.
I haven't seen Killing Eve. It didn't attract me, but
We stumbled upon it again.
Yeah.
So I just did a rush of a couple of episodes. And I still don't understand it. In fact, many of the series network in such a way that are elusive.
how
I
so?
did see this show called Us, a two-part series that was pretty interestingly done.
I
Of a
liked
family
it.
that was breaking up and trying to come together simultaneously.
Yeah, with Tom Holland.
Yeah, so that was on PBS there. So we're stumbling upon some interesting things. We'll see. Some old movies, maybe. Do you watch the Criterion Channel at all?
I don't have that channel, but I have TCM and I watch old movies.
Yeah,
Yes.
those are very great. You know, sometimes there's backdrop here to watch
Yeah.
old film. Yeah, but still, life is going on.
I wish you could be in Ojai. It's wonderful here.
Yeah. Why? What's
60
happening?
to 80 degrees.
Yeah. So now we came down to 60 something when we were 90 something overnight, and then we've had rains. So it's been quite beautiful. But then when I went out and I did this club exercise in the morning, and then brushed my teeth, I had yellow fingers. Well, surprisingly, they looked like makeup, like somehow I touched turmeric or something. But I had these yellow fingers. But in the last 2 weeks or more, I've had a kind of overreaction, I'm reading, of the immune system to, and maybe again, an ingrown toenail. But it's somehow written into the landscape of my body now that something happens in the toe that kicks off an immune reaction, overreaction. And in looking it up, we found something that resembles it called Raynaud's syndrome. Raynaud, I guess it's said that way. And it's part of an autoimmune reaction. an overreaction to something small,
Mhm.
but that it has a traveling inflammation. But somehow the body itself becomes its own problem. So the reaction of the immune system becomes the problem itself. Where you have this like a dog gets excited or something, or the cat gets excited, you have to calm it down. You have to say, okay, baby, it's okay. It was just a scare in your own naive way. You're treating the body as if they're babies now and that need to be cared for in a different way. A little tenderness for the feet or something. It's demanding tenderness. But anyway, it was scary for a while because then it eliminated walking immediately. I couldn't put any.
Danny, do you ever try Chinese medicine, acupuncture, and herbs? Is that
Yeah, I think that's included here, but I'm also, we have Janet who's really exploring all of this. And I guess Brenda and she are growing their own out there. And so they're farming all day, and I'm the beneficiary of all their science and knowledge or whatever. But in my own mind's eye, the feet says, you didn't care for me all year. You didn't wash me and take care of me with that nice soap and all that. So somehow, whatever the reality of a circumstance, I still kind of been using wishful thinking, magical thinking, and with a little bit of reason thrown in, like the black pepper on the turmeric that you need to put on turmeric. So I'm using reasoning more like the black pepper.
Is it diagnosed as neuropathy? Is it a form of neuropathy on the feet?
It's a form of what they would call lupus.
Lupus.
If you look under lupus, then you'll see a spin-off. You'll see there are spin-offs of that.
That's what Flannery O'Connor had.
Well, you'll see that many, yeah, and you'll start to see more and more folks will have it just by living long enough.
Uh-huh.
Where you see how remarkable the immune system has fended and managed your life in some way. And
is it autoimmune? Is it an autoimmune?
Me, the smallest thing. But I noticed in the one space all the time. It's happened before, but when we thought it was a gout, it was found out not to be a gout, and there was no reason for a gout, and they couldn't. And so they had me do all these tests that you also had, Kai, with dye and all of this to find out what happens if it was a heart thing or why it would. But for me, I saw one thing that little toe, the second toe, that's slightly bigger than the big toe, gets an ingrown toenail, gets red or irritated, and all of a sudden it kicks off. The big toe then becomes inflamed, and it just goes like that. But then the other leg happens between toes. I'm wearing. So then there is it's kicked off by something small, but then I also see that maybe the vaccine, maybe the test that I had where they went inside me and I didn't take penicillin for it. So then I'm backtracking to see, because I noticed in the past, if I've taken penicillin, that it takes me a week or two for the body to come back to a balance again. So I am aware of my body that much. But it does fit so far. If you look up this Raynaud's syndrome, that it's pretty clear what happens. That it attacks the capillaries.
Yeah, it sounds like blood in circulation.
It's a small thing that's, so I haven't done anything yet except just wait it out. And waiting it out now, I am walking, it seems okay or manageable. I've used inflammable cream on it as a relaxant and stuff like that. But I've also done exercise to give it some movement.
Danny, it's a small thing, but when you watch movies, put your feet up. Don't sit with the feet
No,
on.
I do.
Okay. No, I know it's a small thing.
No, I understand it,
But if it's blood in circulation, that
well,
helps.
we have all that exercise equipment. So I do have that thing that you can lie in bed
Put your feet up.
and it's like a cube, Pilates cube or something that I put my legs on. So this is interesting for the world to know. You're waiting for some major thing to happen, and all of a sudden your toes blow up and your fingers blow up. And it's the weirdest thing, but somehow, it's an immune reaction, an autoimmune overreaction to a circumstance, to a small thing, but it's not a small thing. So then it introduces you to your body in a very personal way. And there are personal conversations that you see, just like in many relationships, you see the missing conversation that has been sending you signals for a long time. And sometimes they're, hey, baby, your body is sending you, hey, baby signals.
Oh, yes.
Can you look at me? Tell me how can you become aware of me? Now, I don't want to make it too Meshuggah sounding, but actually, when it does take place, you become aware of also not only the shenanigans of how to relate to it, but the one thing is that somehow the neglect that was inherently there, that's inherent, not something practiced or whatever, but that one takes one's life in a way for granted. They've normalized their existence in some way. And there are some events that force soul searching from a more genuine place, and they're tiny, this damn ingrown toenail. So I was going to think of the large thing, cancer or this or that, and the damn ingrown toenail is in fact the way that the being slips out of the body through the toenail. You say, why not? So let's say that one, again, at the same time one is treating or caring for, one sees that until a pain happens or until a mishap happens, the kind of focus on it is not only a focus of getting rid of it, but you see that there is in fact a happening in the body. If the circulation is losing in the fingers and it's losing in the toes or whatever, it is also giving you a little message. Got 2 more years to go. You got it's whispering to me, 2 more years, 2 more years.
2 more years now. That is with
So could that be that my fingers were saying to me, 2 more? No, we don't want to do more than 1 more year. The middle finger was saying 1 more year, and the toe with the ingrown toenail was refusing to do 2 more years. I had to be persuaded. And that's to ensure that I would do a daily bath in oil for it, and it will give me 2 more years. Now, is that wishful thinking? Or maybe it's even magical thinking or Meshuggah thinking. But do you think there's any reasoning allowed in that? That somehow if you take care of your feet in a more intimate way, it'll look out for you also?
Louise Hay wrote a book about that. Do you have that little book? You know what she said about the feet?
What did she say?
Fear of going forward, fear of the future.
Oh, really? Yeah.
I don't think that applies to you, but.
No, I wouldn't. But fear of the future would be, what future do you imagine then?
Well,
Hidden
it's
glory.
it's a glossary. You look up your ailment and then she has an
Oh, yes,
interpretation.
I think I do have that, yeah. I
Yeah,
do.
heal your body, I think. And then there's an affirmation or
And
something.
there is a book called Body also that's very interesting.
Yes.
Yes, Body is very nice reference. You know, you can just accidentally open it and it applies to you somehow. You know, and it's there's a few books like that. The book Breathe or Breath. Have you seen it? It's very
No.
intelligently done by this young man, and about the where the breathing then takes you or whatever. But it's very interesting the work that he's put into it.
PBS is having a series on the body because I've never been educated into anatomy or the body systems too much.
That's
And
pretty well done. That's
yeah, I'm getting a lot out of it.
they have
It's
that.
all about the gut is more important than anything for the immune system. That was one of the things I learned yesterday.
So what do you say? But to have considered the immune system in any of your past transactions, the immune system would have said to you, "What about me? I don't want to go to India.
Yeah.
I want to stay."
Amoeba, dysentery.
If your
Wow.
immune system says, "I'm a Texan, I don't want to do this Indian story." Okay.
No,
Let's say you find out your immune system has a mind of its own.
yeah.
And
My body's still paying for India.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. So your body was telling, it must have been smacking you along the way also, saying, okay.
No.
So when you think of it, how you altered the whole course of things, of the predictable karma that you had in you was altered by this, what they would call a dopey event, but you would see that somehow you escaped the karma to some degree. You found a way out of the karma creatively. And all it took in some way was having a feeling about someone that logically would have never been permitted, but the feeling allowed a happening to take place. What's the philosophy again? I would say Meshuggah. So I just happened to be walking down the street and suddenly this happened. And I say, as a matter of fact, for suddenly this to happen, there has to be such a lineup of mysterious events overlapping for a moment to take place. But you also see that somehow, somewhere it's planned, even though it's accidental as it comes into our life, or chance, or whatever. But you see that how organized chance was in retrospect. You see the grid, and you see that somehow in certain moments, naive was the way to go, because you were in fact naive. It's not that you were playing naive. Something revealed. You should write a book about it.
I did. I sent it to you.
You should. I know I haven't.
You probably didn't read it.
I don't. Look at her. She sizes me up this way or that.
It's called Buddha and the Dancing Girl.
I have it here.
Yeah, you asked me to send it.
Okay, so I'm quoting from that. So I'm giving you that I had a literal address and a social security number and all of that. You see that a magical, weird thinking, accident, chance was brilliant.
Well, in India, they'd call that prabdha karma, sort of what we come in with. And
To be able to get a glimpse of the life that one has lived, not from the owner's perspective or the me perspective, but you also understand the management of the me as survival. But then you also understand that there are moments, that flashbacks or whatever, where the story is not a possessive. It releases the literalness of the story, and you see what I would call holy shit. Bullshit in one way, that reasoning was that strong, and holy because there was a holy thread that ran through the weird story that you only become informed of when you can't do anything about it. You would have considered it a flaw that needed to be corrected or needed to be trained or whatever. But you saw that there was a creative thread that ran through the story. And there are moments when it interacted with the outer world, that creative thread, and you see a life. What's the philosophy again? Okay, I say close your eyes. So you see even the mistakes were brilliant. In retrospect, they were brilliantly composed as mistakes or screw-ups. But you see, in screwing up, you found your way out of situations that were no longer for you, that were no longer creative or something. So I say that somehow there was a creative thread that ran through the story and made a kind of association with a creative expression. You run into a similar situation where relationship becomes the dynamic, the absence of and the presence of. In fact, sometimes the absence of is stronger in relationship than the presence of, which naturalizes. So somehow loss or space or time may give one a deeper sense of the relationship than the literalness of the everyday, which may space out the original feelings. So somehow in absence, the feelings become the relationship, not the logic. And sometimes there is access to the life that you've lived, not from the possessive, but from the holy shit perspective that you've gone through this existence as Catherine and John. Deserves both a medal and a kick. Some award ceremony, what should we call it? What should we call the association they would give you? We'll call it a kiss and a kick for having lived as Catherine Ann Jones. How did you pull it off? Vitamin B12? So let's say if we describe everyone's perspective that way, where it's no longer the life as a possessive, but one was the vehicle of a body of experiences. And that you have a relative sense of what's happening while you're living it. But there are times that you re-enter the story from a different place, where there's a space between you and the identity that you're in, where you're assuming that identity. Not falsely, but creatively. Somehow you are responding to some dialogue that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'll find myself, I'm invited to go to the mall on Saturdays where all these old geezers are, and they're all Marines or something like that. But still somehow we've woven something there where there is a kind of a creative conversation runs through the story, independent of the differences between the people. It's just schmaltz, But somehow there's a call, hey, you're coming down or something like that. And I say, even though the difference is logically, there's a shared space that sometimes happens. And that is somehow a consciousness without it literalizing as consciousness, that a dying and a living are simultaneously happening. And that somehow the conversation is around this, in between this, in different perspectives of a similar thing. But somehow there is, in the look of the eye, the acknowledgement that you share something even separate from their families or circumstance, in the look of an eye. And that they say, well, they got stage 4. This, I said, okay, give a call and I'll see, if you get in over your head or something like that. So let's say that basically the shared dying as a natural part of the phenomena in front of you is inherently there. And then there's a literal life that's being lived that they re-entered. But in fact, the immersive element is very much like watching a film together. And different perspectives on that film, but somehow there was a creative act that was shared. So if you meet, you can even describe that film and laugh about it or complain about it. But there was a shared creative experience that connected the people. Not so much a historical group of people, but people who kind of met creatively. That's again the terms that you're always attempting to recreate, where the meeting of minds and folks are not historically determined, but that a history is an aspect of your life, not the dominating element. I find that with some exercises that muscles are a minor part of the exercise, not the dominant part. It's exercising, in other words, or health is not so much athleticism as a kind of creative fitness for yourself, that there's some truths that are happening with yourself that are not blunt. At times they're blunt. If your feet swell up or something, and you have to make an agreement of 2 more years with them, and that means that you'll bathe them every day. Okay. So let's say the body is signaling you that there's a happening taking place and that it's a juggling act. And if you see the whiteness in the fingertips or the toes or whatever, it's indicating to you that it's bringing blood elsewhere, because the first thing it sacrifices is toes and fingers generally to save the heart and liver and things like that. So let's say I'm meeting a conversation. This Raynaud's syndrome that I've stumbled upon seems to fit it, where they say there's nothing to do, essentially. It's a thing that occurs in the body's messaging. So they give you certain immediate things that you may try. But basically, and as I recall, it does seem to be in the memory. That once you remember that pain in the toe, it does kick off a syndrome that seems to be waiting there in the body. So the intimacy of not seeing it so much as an enemy to be gotten rid of, because I also see that in the past the doctors were also baffled by it. And it's usually more the naturalists who are everyday people who are experiencing it, so they've seen it often before. And to doing is pretty natural, but it means waiting it out generally. going about your business, and see if the body then just returns to its natural. Is that naive, Katrin?
No, I was thinking of Kubler-Ross and her. I heard
Yeah,
her.
we have doctor friends here and their wives say, so when you speak, then they say, yeah, same thing happened to myself last week. So you see the doctors are also going through whatever, where they kind of live natural at home, and yet they were emergency room doctors or whatever, having to be in that atmosphere all day. But so they're seeing a lot of stuff out there that this year may have brought into the situation or accelerated,
Well, Kubler-Ross perceived, though she was a doctor, she perceived illness as metaphor.
Yeah, I also, but I think that we're utilizing dying as the metaphoric aspect of living, which is, we'll say living is the continuity of living, but then you see that dying while you're living is the metaphor that's coexistence along it. And so it uses a different logic. But sometimes they to have access to a process that's happening to you is unique. Usually an event has to happen that forces you to see it, or to see some aspects of it, like a doctor's checkup, as it literalizes. But then it literalizes as a problem to be gotten rid of. When you see that somehow you co-conspire to continue it over a long period of time, you see a co-conspiring somehow inside of one where they say they have too much to do, so mañana, I'll put it in mañana. There's a kind of mañana-ness to the brain that puts things off, not as a flaw. It comes out to the literal world as a flaw, that you don't consider the literal situation to be so important that you must do it, but that somehow you have room in your story.
It's not a flaw, it's a message. The
Well,
body is speaking,
It exists on many levels. On the civil level, it's the one will continue in what they're doing and ignore some other signals that are taking place in some way, by taking an aspirin or dulling it, or taking some shot or whatever to quiet it. So it's remarkably complex, remarkably inventive. It's brilliant. The human life is a brilliant movement. If you see it in retrospect, it's even what they would call a normal life is a movie worth seeing. But then whether it's an introduction to, and I say, would you like now to live a normal life? And I say, to do your version of normal. I would like to see your version of normal, Catherine Jones.
Version of what?
A version of a normal life.
Oh, normal. I don't know what that is. I've never tried it.
Urja, do you have a version of a normal life? I have an idea. Let's take this French woman and put her in Boulder, Colorado, 80 years later, and see if we can work it out. What do you say, Urja? Have you worked it out?
I look around me, I see mountains and brooks and
So what's the philosophy again at 81 now? Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Is that a good description? Looking for a manger.
holy shit.
Holy shit seems to be that you see that the difference between being religious and having a religion is that somehow it's not, it's more based on a genuineness, the religious thread running through it. It can't be told what to do unless it's in line with its own creative perspective. So let's say that one becomes deeply aware in retrospect of a thread that runs through your life. And it's gone through all the forms. Childhood, this situation, that situation. There was a youth thread that ran through the story. And it assumed all the identities of a situation.
And Danny,
Yeah.
this morning, I had a baby conversation with my ex-husband. And it was because of my daughter. She was like
Also because of what Kai said.
yes, it's
Yeah,
funny.
Kai
I
said that
was thinking
20
about
years
it.
ago. Yeah.
And I think probably while I was talking to him, I had still that experience of a story in me. And that must have helped a lot.
Well, in one sense, you see also, in retrospect, however weird it was, literally, you see how remarkably the underpinnings of something, the thread that ran through the story. And so when you meet the thread that ran through the story, you kind of also may have realized, you realize something that the other didn't realize in the story. It literalized. But you see, almost there was a creative act. And there was enough course that it was going to break up in it. And of course, this was going to happen. They could have told you that from the first moment with a DNA analysis test or something. This is when you're going to break up. This is what's going to happen. The kids are going to be hurt. And then they said, you want to take their movie on.
Yeah.
And you say, holy shit, can I do the movie? That it would be holy shit for me to do the movie of Verja. I come back into the story as Verja, married to, was he a French guy or an American guy? In New York with 2 children. Okay, so let's say, I don't know if I can pull it off there. It's an Academy Award performance. And they say, I have an idea. Let's throw Rajneesh into the story. Is that a good suggestion, Catherine? What to do with his French family? Just throw Rajneesh on his way to Washington or whatever the hell he went to, for Oregon. Okay. And then have that as the rationale for saying bye-bye birdie or something. And you're then going to enlightenment. And so then somehow you've, what a brilliant move. It changed the course of everything. It turned everyone in the story now. No one had a job anymore. Now they all had creative lives themselves. What training did you give them? No, I asked Catherine, what training did you give so that you can have such brilliant grandchildren or whatever? Okay. How did you pull it off? How did you get access immediately to, hey, baby?
Yeah.
Grandchild, where there's just a hey, baby in the story, a kind of immediacy where there's no history. There's more mystery. The attraction is there. Somehow the knowledge of each other is there. And yet you understand the history, how you had to manage the history to be there for the mystery of it. And you see how brilliant you were in managing, whoosh. What do you think, Catherine? So you have still an immediacy with the grandchild.
Yes, in fact, he's coming in a couple of weeks to spend 10 days with me. He's amazing. He's 16 now.
Okay, and and how old is your son, Kai?
14.
14.
Oh, a teenager.
Well, there's a lot of kids that have come out of our situation here now that are varying ages, but they're also pretty sharp kids.
Yeah, he's
He's
a rap poet.
Yes.
Great.
As a matter of fact, that's what Gyana, who comes on every now and then, that we met in Rishikesh, but lives up in Marin now, I think. And still goes back and forth to India. She has a guru there in Rishikesh who's become very popular. Bala Yogi is his name. And I remember meeting him 50 years ago, I think, or so. And I had someone asked me to bring him a pair of these red shoes that sadhus wore, from a store in Delhi or something. So then I did him a favor and I climbed, but it had a barbed wire fence there. I had to climb over the fence. And when I got there, he was lying on the side in a Buddha pose, this boy yogi that they found in the woods. And they found him at 14 or so. So he must have been 25 or 30 there. And he had a couple of California women serving tea and things like that there. And it was very, had some tea there. But then I got to know him because then one of the women then became part of our own situation later on, after they kind of broke up or whatever. And now I hear he's pretty big again. And in fact, many of the gurus there, but it's become very oriented towards a right-wing feeling there of yoga and realization belonging to an Indian perspective. I felt in the late 60s and 70s when we went there, I went there, it came more from a hipness that was happening in America and the rest of the world that thrust upon India. And then the Beatles after that and so on, that mix, and then it popularized a happening in India, but we thrust more of a LSD vision on India. And most Indians had escaped. It was as if we were loyalists to the Catholic Church or we were crusaders and we were dying for Jesus or whatever, where most people were just going about their business with Christianity. We took something seriously. So we created our own thing, I think, in Goa and other places. That when that left, something also left with it to some degree. It's that the Indian motif was part of a spiritual lifestyle or something, a way of living, or an attempt to live naturally or not influenced by forces. Has that happened? Do you feel that you got the promise of that first Meshuggah move where you had a creative life, Catherine?
Oh, no. Yes. I was just thinking we were in India at the same time. You were north, I was south. 68 is when
that overlapped at one point because some of the women that lived in the place when we were in Old Delhi went to visit the nun. There was a nunnery in Kerala, that you can that women could hang out in and kind of get their act together or their sense of themselves together or something. I think the premise was so Kerala, and then also we met who Doctor became very close to. What's her name again?
Amma. She's
Vimla.
Amma or something.
Vimla Tucker.
Oh, Tucker, right. Yeah.
Tucker, I guess they spell it Tucker. But when she would say it, they would say Tucker.
Oh,
But she also moved up to the house. She had a little house in Dalhousie, down the road from us. So she then.
Dr. Krishna knew her well. Did you ever meet Dr. Krishna? He comes every year to Ojai.
Oh yeah, I met Dr.
From Varanasi. Yeah.
But Vibha was on the ball, and the Krishnamurti rejected her in some way because she wrote about a kind of healing that he did for her, that he didn't want out. Her hearing was off, and Krishnamurti kind of would palm her ears or something when she met them. But she came more out of a Gandhi background, and so I think that they didn't like Gandhi too much, the Krishnamurti and that crowd. They didn't like the Gandhiism too much. But there were people who were devoted that came out of Gandhi. There was one fellow, I think, that was making food for the poor. that she was influenced by. So she had that underlying affection that wouldn't fly well if you introduced it also to the inquiry. That somehow you had to be free from that, which now they're finding is a loss. That somehow that there's a genuine feeling that inflects the exploration is not a loss. Mhm. Okay. So she seemed to be genuine that way, that somehow she was melding the caring for others and inherent caring for others
Mhm.
with the perspective of looking. You know. So I thought she met Doctor around that. There was an instant feeling when they met, I heard. So what do
That's often lacking, I found, in Advaita Vedanta, because it can be so impersonal that there's a lack of compassion, you know. I had a problem with that my years in India.
Well, there's something similar to that in that series Shtisel.
And what? Oh, the series.
That
No, I haven't seen it.
Shtisel, which is that somehow what happened with me when I was dating then a woman who her husband divorced her in Israel and he remarried, but she was still bound by some law called the get, and we went there to this Jewish theological ceremony. Guys, a Hasidic Jewish community. And they said almost what they said on Shtisel. If he's still thinking about her, the poor guy, how can he let her go? How can, you know what he'll do to him if she remarries? He'll maybe commit suicide. We need 8 babies out of this guy. so they would come from that your reason for existence was to have 8 babies. And that, of course, you're going to go through all this crap if you take seriously that you need to have 8 babies in this lifetime. Okay.
I think it's called patriarchy.
So then you see, how will a man be able to have 8 babies? How will a woman, they say, the man will have to cheat and lie and go through so many things. So then you have to forgive the poor schmuck, even though it violates you. And they say, why can't I get remarried if he's remarried? Okay. And you say, because he's thinking of you. And his thinking of you is allowing babies to happen. So then you say, holy shit. You see a whole philosophy running through the story. That you are built to have babies. And if you're not built to have babies, then you become a rabbi or a priest or something like that. Or you're one of these mashugana people who never gets a job, doesn't go to school or whatever, you know. So that's 1/5 of the population, we'll say. But they have it outlined according to God's perspective. And that somehow you have to pray all day. And somehow the woman's role is to help you pray all day. You want the job, Catherine? It doesn't pay that much. And you probably have to be pregnant every other year. But you get free dancing and free other things like that. So let's say it's very attractive if you're in it, because there seems to be a solid group that are living that way. And they feel to maintain their community.
Well, it's twofold. People seem to need to belong somewhere, and they need structure for the life. And dogma and religion give it.
Well, if you grow up in that circumstance, then it naturalizes itself. Yeah. So then somehow you have to get out of it when it looks like to the person who's not in it, then you can just walk across the street and say bye-bye, that you don't have to go through years of psychological help and care. And they say, are you kidding me? You need to go through psychological help when take a movie of the life that you just lived. Are you kidding me? It seems to me you must be aware there was a movie that you were in.
Yeah.
and that you put your heart into it, I understand. Just like you would if you were in a movie, but then you wake up to something and it's not a violation of that, it's another stage of that. And so then you see, there are quite a few films now that show breaking with somehow wanting to find a girlfriend or a boyfriend or to live a life or to go to school or to do something like that, which seemed pretty normal, meant the person had to go through so many lies, had to hide it, had to conceal it, had to create a whole double life of other people who have gone through something similar. And then as I remember my father then, when we finally realized sitting on the bed that he decided to die and not eat. And it happened to be almost an accidental, magical situation where my son was also sitting at the foot of the bed, and we had the realization that he was letting go of his life. And I said, do you need any help? And he said, no, he can do it himself. I thought he had friends who were in cahoots with him because the institution couldn't allow you to pass. But there were people who would care for you somehow within a circumstance. And that somehow they made, you had to become a sneak, you know, to do something that was quite graceful between the people involved. And that was somehow that there was a grace in dying, where people looked out for each other. Not so much to make it this way or artificially this way or that way, but a kind of friendship that prevailed, that understood the underlying issue of what was happening. And that the perception of dying as the majority of what was happening, not the small, where living had surrendered to dying. And you could measure the dying as 85%, as 15% living. That somehow they were not treating dying as a flaw. They were treating the inability to care for it as the flaw. The inability of a business-oriented medical field of extension that would not give the naturalness of dying a right of the story. And then you would also understand if perceptively you saw dying together with the living, what we intuit, should we get medical advice? Should we enter into a medical literalness of it? Should we then do our own version of natural or whatever? These are the questions that come when you have to literalize what is happening to you. Because then when you literalize what is happening to you, surely there's a continued treatment towards it. And some of us suffer the effects of treatment more than the thing itself. Okay. Now, let's say the last time this foot looked like it was going to get angry, they gave me those dye tests, as I remember. And I remember having to tell jokes to this weird situation that I was in, where I had to humanize it and act this way and that way. And then there was a heart test that was also that they put you inside that chamber. They slide you in there. And it's weird when that becomes normal. Just like it's weird every few months where I had to go in and where they insert this camera inside me, even though it was interesting to see. The setting had a kind of Netflix look to it, you know, or a comedy. You know, there's a show called Getting On. There's an English version of it and there's an American version of it, and they're both equally weirdly funny. But Getting On is the hospital people taking care of older people or people who are between lives, visited by their families, and the arguments they have and the love affairs they have. But it's quite funny, and both English version and the American version are very funny. But let's say you get glimpses as you watch these shows or this or that, you get a glimpse of a parallel situation happening for you, where there's a wink, where let's say wink being people who share something, where there's an intimacy in the sharing as to how the person is managing a creative life and a literal life. And the balancing act in that. And in fact, you start to see shows where they're showing you people managing a creative life, or a detective who manages a home situation or has a baby. But what they are showing you is a kind of duality that runs through the story, where the so-called creative life or spiritual life that you're living, while you have a literal job to do, literally, and you're sharing the creative life with some who see it from that place. And so then they also share somehow your literal reality. And they see where it's really challenging at times, when in fact you're coming into it from the friendship, you have access to a creative happening. So you can share in that creative friendship a kind of feeling that can't be shared in a literal story about the duality of a circumstance, where somehow it's literalized, and it's only because there is an inner life that allows you literally then to somehow make some creativity of the situation, that somehow you, by your presence, you bring a creative dimension to the story. So that you understand your own balancing of act. And you also understand, Catherine, I watch you do this without literally realizing or doing, but how to get from the history to the mystery. That somehow just instantly there's a love, hey baby, hey baby, come on, jump up and, okay. It's the instantaneousness of it. Can be blocked by a karmic, hey, don't do that to grandma, she's not, okay, whatever. Okay, so you see the history and the mystery overlap. To be able to manage it, not in literalness, but somehow come to terms, is I think what Kai said last week then about calling someone of 27 years ago or something like that and saying, I'm sorry, baby, or that I couldn't see something in the moment, and how it releases the story to some degree from a possessor. Because you see, time didn't happen. Time didn't shift. The relationship still existed in that moment. Even though 100 years may pass, you see, the relationship existed in that moment, and then one little thing that allows you perspective shifts the plane of the story creatively. But if you try to logically get there, logic would be that you get a lawyer or something like that, when somehow it requires what looks like an accident is actually a genuineness of yourself, of the story that you're in. There's something that happens when there's a feeling that takes place, that a genuineness happens also, that releases the story from its possessor. Because you get a glimpse of your own life. And you see that there are certain memories that have allowed you to continue on in a certain way, but have also blocked a creative passage of seeing that somehow, in retrospect, you could see that somehow the beginning and the end of the relationship was inherently in the story, not something that anyone did everyone followed the rules of the story that they were in, thinking they were making their own decisions. And you see how creatively precise it was. And what happens in memory is that it hips the other to an experience that they blocked out of the mind by personalizing it. But a hey baby moment detoxes the possessing or the personalizing of the experience, where somehow you introduce life as a creative act, and that at one point you shared a love affair. And somehow, thank God, you got out of that love affair. Okay. You see that God helped you get out of that love affair, where you thought this happened and that happened and this happened, but you see that somehow the energy freed you. Is that really possible, Kai?
Oh,
That,
yeah.
that somehow the babies were waiting to happen. They were saying, no, get rid of this guy. You got to get that guy. No, that's the one we want. That's it. Could it be possible that the babies had a life before they had a life?
Yes.
And they were kind of directing you. Did we lose everyone with that one? Well, it seems that we have.
Maybe Catherine.
Did Catherine have to go? Yeah. So let's say with that one, but is it possible that the story is somehow not literally written, but kind of creatively written, where somehow there's something in you that is looking? Now, it's not only the literalness of the body looking, but that basically there are kind of, in retrospect, you have access to the journey that you've been trying to figure out throughout the life as you're living it. But somehow seeing the whole journey is what they would call a death experience, not the literal deathness of it, but where you don't own the story. So you get glimpses of that as one goes through, but a full perspective where you that is the death to the self. That it sees something accidentally that releases the story from its possession all those years. And somehow it sees something where it no longer owns the story and it releases it.
Yeah.
And it was always, they could say, come on, why didn't you do that? And you say, it had to be true. So you see that there's a parallel life that's being lived. While you're living a literal life of survival or whatever, you see that there's a parallel life where somehow it has to be true. But it's not laid out what true is. But it is not the survival dimension. It is an act of grace, where you see the perspective releases the story from the possession of the people, and they see that they've lived a creative experience, but they've been blocked from seeing it as a creative experience, where they've literalized it as a possessor. So every now and then it comes back, and so that's what they were telling me around this idea of the get, if the guy still remembers her, because it's his memory of her that may allow him to make love with the new one. So it's a complicated thing that they figured out to have, where when you wake up one moment, you say, hey, your life is laid out. It's no longer laid out. Once you realize it is not a flaw, it was a thing that allowed you to survive through the story. But this aspect of the life is not so much around survival. It's somehow more around the grace. So you see that you're managing different levels of love as a way of your own existence. So it's not, you see that somehow an attraction to you, especially if it was a true attraction, the truer the attraction, the more faithful you are to the association in some weird way. So you see that that attraction has allowed you to enter into the literal story.
Yeah.
And somehow, generally, the person who's attracted to you has been able to leave their own story for a period of time. They may return to their own story again, but as they return to their own story, they may lose what creatively you had when you were sharing something together. So I'm saying, okay, that you see that there is an energy that runs through the life. And then one is assuming the identities of the story that they're in. And somehow, but the attraction to you is deeper than the identity. So the attraction to you then exists in dreams or hopes or memory or whatever. Wow, okay. It's all very weird. You want the job. But it does seem to me that it's a kind of genuineness that runs through the story. When it ceases to be genuine, it also dissolves in one form. Then the people have a different agreement. It's yet to be laid out what that is when a literal situation then becomes a creative act. As simple as taking care of this or taking care of that. You see, that's a creative act. Do you want the job? It's always kind of voluntary now, but not voluntary from the self, but from basically where you're not a prisoner of form any longer. In other words,
Right.
if you look at the situation, it doesn't need you.
No.
Okay, so let's say get rid of 3 needs. Does it need you?
Mhm.
Okay. So you measure the relevance of a story. It's not about doing anything. It is more about seeing and sharing. That basically one of the things that you had seen to is that everybody is sane. Everybody is lived to their life. No one's a victim or anything like that. You know.
Yeah, I had a really weird dream about all that the other night, which led to a really good conversation.
Well, I think that the dreaming will be one aspect of it, where it's not exactly a dream, but it is a kind of perspective on something. Where it's not so much that you have to literally interpret the dream, but you kind of see you're seeing something that got you into the story in the first place, that somehow it's a creative act, and somehow the normal world makes it when something breaks up where people become sneaky or sneaks, have to hide their life. And somehow you've minimized the need. The person is free to fall in love, and you're equally free to fall in love. And so even from that feeling, that's a remarkable agreement, that it's not a contest with that, but it still may literalize with a person compete. See that in managing where the story is free, freed from its ownership. And there is an agreement that if you're doing something, it's you doing it, because you see that there's a goodness in doing it. Mm-hmm. And so that's your call. It's a feeling. It's a life of feeling, and to some degree, that then applies its logic. But it's one of feeling that you're you're making sure these kids get to an age where they can live their life. And you're doing it sometimes in your own dumb way and sometimes in your own brilliant way or whatever, but your own vibes. And that there's an agreement somehow between folks that that's what's happened.
Yes.
So, and it doesn't have to literalize in a contract, but there is a kind of understanding that you once loved each other in a way, and not to really throw that away. Even though that is shifted literally, it was real when it was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that there are people now who no longer have a need to lie and be ashamed of themselves or this or that when they have very real human qualities that are happening, where they want somehow a love to be true. And true is not laid out, but false is. So it's not around all the literal issues or whatever, but it's around the true, intelligent feeling shared. So I feel that there is a happening that's happening natural while we're living our life.
Mm-hmm.
You say, Derek.
Seems to be.
That somehow you are in a situation to have the experience. That's not so organized by history, is not so organized by a prior situation, but is still leaving it somewhat to the intelligence of the people involved. What kind of life they're wishing to have in the moment, or
Yeah, it feels like there's a faith component in that, or that has me white knuckle gripping it at times.
well, let's say you kind of see a thread of intelligence that runs through the story. Let's say the kids, if there are kids in it, can pick up instantly if the parents have gone nuts or not, or if in fact they kind of are living what they say. So let's say just the appearance of the kids alone in a circumstance would say, don't mess with mommy with bullshit. Okay, they don't have to say it, but just one would feel that if you came into the situation. And then they say, okay. And then you would say, what would they say to mom? They say, give him a chance to do his best. They would say to mommy. And they say, okay, so can you play this script where the kids are so intelligent, where they're kind of the ones that they're working the situation. And they're working it not because they're scared or this or that. They're working it for what they feel is the best thing. And I say, that's impossible. If you can get anything close to that, man, you understand, where somehow, even though that may be a shaky agreement, you see that somehow in the life that you're living in the everyday, there's more than an everyday happening. There is a kind of management of the life in this last year, especially, where there's a hidden enemy that you have to do something about it or not do something about it. You have to wear a mask or get vaccinated or not. It's forcing you to take sides or make issues of it, but it's still invisible. Then it becomes visible when someone gets it or doesn't get it or whatever. But you also see that it's almost like a God kind of image or something like that, that there's something in the room with you or happening in life with you. And it's like saying, do you want to go to church now? Well, you don't want to go to church. And they say, I don't feel like going to that church. It's not my church. And they say, you better go to church. But you say the thing that you're talking about is invisible.
Mm-hmm.
There's a limitation to what you can know about it. So those people who put on a costume drama and they know what it is and they don't know what it is, when in fact it's still invisible. And you may pick up it in dreams and hopes and things, but you organize it into something. But at the same time, in your own innocence, you had an experience where you're having a conversation with the energy as you're living. Then I say, yeah, well, you become aware that you're having a conversation with your body as you're living. And it's not literal, but you're always having a conversation with your body, whether it's you're sitting down or standing up, you're making decisions, what position to be in. You see there's a constant dialogue going on with the body. And so when an accident or a situation happens where you become aware of this whole conversation that one is happening all the time. If they say you want to take a walk, you're kind of, well, I don't know. You consult your body to see. And it's so natural. But once it's illuminated, then it shifts from natural to creative in some way, where it's participatory.
Danny, we have a pretty good storm here and my lights keep flashing. So if we happen to lose power, that's why.
Okay. No, that's good also. Is everyone okay? There's only a few of us left here. Are there many?
Jai is on.
Jai is on?
Mhm.
Okay. With her picture, or we see her picture?
No.
Okay, but we've had anybody else on? It's been pretty interesting though. It's just, we're kind of utilizing a stream of consciousness conversation. And Catherine, it was the medium where she's kind of used somehow from a teenager on, for a young woman on, I think, has had a creative life that she stepped into. And yet it would be a movie in its own right. But it really did happen. She was this, she was that, she was a mother, she was this. And so let's say you also have had the experience, and we were kidding before with Urja, where she's had the experience that somehow she enters into the story. She's married, she has family, she has structure, she finds a way out of it, it shifts the plane. So you say, what a weird life. I say, it wouldn't be weird if you read it in a novel. It wouldn't be weird if you saw it in a movie.
Right.
It's weird if you describe it.
Mhm.
But if in fact you would look at it, you would see a brilliance running through it. That it used mistakes and accidents and situations. That it used all these forms. It took a chance on being a bad mother, being termed a bad mother, to be a free human being. And then becoming a mother as a free human being. And seeing a whole orchestration of somehow a creative life that looked like a literal life. If it's described, we'll say to where do you come from, this and that, it's a literal life. But then you see perspective on it, and you see that somehow there's an energy that flew through this whole experience. And sometimes you have accidental moments where it flashes you back 20 years at a time, or 20 minutes, or 20 years. There's a similarity in time, where time from that perspective is not literal time. But somehow you access something that's still there in your brain, in your being. That's not 50 years ago or 20 years ago, but is still there and is touched by something. An accidental memory or a rereading of something or whatever then opens up something that's there coexisting with you now, but it looks like it happened in time. But you see there's part of your being that has the whole experience inside itself. At the same time that it's lived all this time, it has all the experiences of the life that it's lived inside itself. And for it to be able to access it, something must happen that has a kind of innocence in it, or no motive in it. It allows you to see something and you meet your own life from a different place. And you see from that place that you've chosen this life in some creative way. Mhm. And that they were kind of you see the creative process, it looks like, and almost as if they were now, from this perspective, scripts that you were given. Do you wish to enter into this story?
Mm.
And you see from the creative perspective, it's not so much bound in time as it is in the kind of realization that the basis of the life and the experience is that there are aha moments in time waiting for the children where they'll kind of meet you in memory.
Mm.
And so somehow you become aware that your presence is creating memory. And that much of the relationship is in memory. And that there's a purity in the memory. And so then you discover purity from a different place. Not the literal purity of the ego,
Yeah.
but the purity of your own genuine story that you're in. Because then you kind of are aware in your own existence that there's a kind of soulfulness that runs through the story, that somehow the soulfulness is you, and somehow the access to that soulfulness is through memory. And somehow it has to be innocent enough so it looks like it's an accident, or it looks like one stumbles upon it, but somehow one must not have motive. But we'll say that you meet Kai as the energy. You meet yourself as the energy. And then you see the assumption of a form that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
And where can you share the deepest? And you see that you have created a format where somehow you're still able to share something essential with friends. Still kind of you have an agreement somehow. And sometimes it's tough. But you see, you've been able to have an agreement somehow where you're able to look out for the kids and take care of what your soulfulness is about and be there for the story. I say, I don't know, I would have to practice for years to do what you're doing. You understand? I don't know that I would be able to pull it off in that way. Do you understand what is natural to you? In retrospect, will be seen from a different perspective. And the retrospect means somehow where the self is out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And you get a glimpse of the life from a different place. You see that you've been caring for something. And even though at times it seems illogical, you see that somehow you've been caring for something. And it's not only around the security of a circumstance, but because it's a good thing. You have a simple measurement as that. Does Jai seem okay, or should we demand that we see her? Jai, can you hear?
She was okay this morning. I talked to her this morning.
Oh, okay.
She was in a good space.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's say the good space, it's like my foot. Now it's in a better space than it was. Okay, so it actually is like that. It's coming and going.
Yeah.
And sometimes you feel like letting it go, and sometimes you feel like you're still into it, and it can be the dumbest thing. Like I was kidding around, maybe a Netflix show or something, where you say, "Oh, I want to see what happens at the end of it." So it can be as though where somehow you're creating your world, and you can see the creating and the living and the dying in the circumstance. Okay, everyone? Derek, you're okay then? We'll see you tomorrow night.
Yep. Doing okay, Danny. Thanks.
and you're okay, and I guess Kai's still there. And Jai, I'll see you. Or give a call sometime. But you're in touch with each other, right, Irja?
Yeah, it has been sweet.
Okay, so let Kai know that I'll see her. If I don't see her Sunday, I'll see her on Wednesday.
Yes, then. Thank you, Danny.
She apparently is called somewhere. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.